Amtrak operates a wide array of locomotives, from tried-and-true diesels to modern electrics, but it also has a small fleet of less-known work engines assigned to odd jobs across its system. While I've talked to no end about Amtrak's flashy new passenger train orders, today we'll be taking a look at the less glamorous, yet arguably just as important project of replacing Amtrak's non-revenue locomotives. Before we begin, you may have noticed that this video went public to members first, which is a new thing I'm trying with my channel membership program. For just $1 a month, in addition to access to exclusive railfanning videos, you can now get early access to my videos before they go public. If that sounds appealing to you, consider joining. Anyway, back to the video. So, what is a work engine? On Amtrak, work engines can be seen in almost every major yard, from some as large as New York, LA, or Chicago, to ones as small as New Haven, Connecticut. These units tend to be assigned to odd jobs across the system, ranging from work trains to equipment moves and yard switching. Let's take a look at this diverse fleet of non-revenue engines and then talk about their replacement. The GE B32-8WH, better known as the Dash 8, is Amtrak's most versatile locomotive, bridging the gap between non-revenue work trains and passenger service. These engines were introduced in the early 90s as a quick fix for Amtrak's locomotive shortage. With the late 70s era F40 locomotives on the way out, and their replacement, the Genesis series, still in development, General Electric modified their Dash 8 freight locomotive to work in passenger service. Between 1990 and 1991, 20 Dash 8s were delivered to Amtrak and quickly used to supplement their aging F40s. Beginning in 1992, GE began production of the Genesis series, which, although mechanically similar, were far more refined than the Dash 8s. Throughout the 90s and 2000s, the Dash 8s could frequently be seen operating with their newer counterparts on long-distance routes, but by the late 2010s, the Dash 8s were reaching the end of their useful service lives. That leaves us where we are today, where the Dash 8s are commonly used as yard power, but rarely see any service on the road. That's not to say that it doesn't happen. This is Amtrak 30, the now abolished Capital Limited with more engines than cars. With a P42 serving as power, a Dash 8 dead in tow, and 4 new Siemens ALC-42 Charger locomotives being delivered, this is a rare instance where one can see 3 generations of Amtrak power on one train. Amtrak's Capital Limited no longer exists, as it was recently combined with the Silver Star to create the Floridian. Additionally, this is, as far as I know, one of the few times that a Dash 8 showed up on a long-distance train in 2024, presumably being moved from yard service in Chicago to yard service in either Washington, D.C. or somewhere in Delaware. While the Dash 8s are mainline power turned work engines, the next group of locomotives is much more clearly for non-revenue trains only. Included in this group are the SW1, SW1000R, SW1001, SW1500, and the MP15 DC, all locomotives with an end cab intended for low-speed yard switching jobs. Of the switchers, the sole SW1 on the fleet is the oldest piece of equipment on Amtrak's network, being built in 1941. That's right, there's an active switcher in Washington, D.C. that was built during World War II. Aside from the single SW1, the rest of Amtrak's switcher locomotives were built between 1952 and 1974, rendering them all due for retirement. All switchers on Amtrak are generally assigned to the Northeast, with the exception of one MP15 in Seattle. Speaking of Amtrak switchers in places they shouldn't be, on the night of July 22, 2024, Amtrak ran its bi-weekly Portland Extra from Boston, Massachusetts to Brunswick, Maine, in order to replace a faulty Amfleet coach on the Downeaster. Unlike most nights, however, there were no extra engines available in Boston, except for MP15 DC number 537. Just before midnight, this 54-year-old switcher rips through Wells, Maine with a single coach. The next day, 537 headed back to Boston, this time with a non-powered control unit, a Horizon coach, a P42, and an Amfleet coach. Right before 5 p.m., it glides over the salt marshes in Scarborough, Maine. Shortly after, we see it again in Wells. Next up are Amtrak's low emissions work engines, which include the GP15D, MP14B, MP21B, and two GS12B locomotives, which unlike the Dash 8s and switchers, are actually relatively modern. That's not to say they're here to stay though, as many of these are gensets. Genset was a locomotive fad of sorts in the early 2000s, where instead of traditional locomotives like GP38s and older 4-axle models, railroads began to purchase highly computerized generator set units. Instead of using one big prime mover, gensets have multiple small engines that dynamically turn on and off depending on workload. Unfortunately, this new technology was rushed to market, and these engines are still known for software issues. Of these 4 models, 3 are gensets, and the odd one out, the GP15D, is also known to be less reliable than its older counterparts. Finally, Amtrak also has 13 GP38-based locomotives rebuilt in the late 90s and early 2000s. These two are classified as GP38-3s and GP38H-3s and are based off the widely popular GP38 road switcher platform used by countless freight railroads. That leads us to the main point of this video. Despite there being many different types of work engines in the fleet, the majority of Amtrak's non-revenue power is all in one way or another at the end of its useful service life. Obviously, models like the MP15 and SW1 are just really old, but even the newer engines like the GP15 and MP14B are just not as capable as their predecessors. In 2021, Amtrak was looking to change this when they placed an order for 30 new work engines manufactured by Progress Rail. Classified as the GP38-3, the new Progress Rail road switchers were rebuilt from GATX GP38 freight locomotives originally built in the 1970s and were mechanically similar to the older GP38-3s and GP38H-3s on Amtrak. In the summer of 2022, the first of these new GP38-3s arrived on Amtrak, and since then they've steadily taken over the duties of some Dash 8s, switchers, and gensets. Deliveries are expected to continue throughout 2025, with a total of 30 GP38-3s, numbered 725 through 754, being delivered by the end of the year. Don't let their shiny Phase 7 paint fool you though, these engines are still half a century old. This illustrates an issue that's been plaguing North American railroads and locomotive manufacturers for at least 20 years. There hasn't been a truly viable 4-axle freight locomotive on sale since 1994 when General Motors' Electromotive division threw in the towel with its general purpose series of locomotives. Way back in 1972, EMD introduced 2 new models, the GP38-2 and the GP40-2. Over the next 14 years, they would produce more than 3,000 of these engines for countless railroads, in addition to rebuilding older GP38s and GP40s to the Dash 2 specification. When production ended in 1986, EMD struggled to bring a worthy successor to the market, and though they were still pretty decent engines, the GP50 and GP60 series never did the same numbers as the 38s and 40s. That leaves us where we are today. The GP38 and GP40-2s are still commonplace on almost every railroad in North America, and there's no sign that they're going away anytime soon. EMD, now known as Progress Rail, has seemingly given up on bringing a new 4-axle road switcher to the market, and aside from the attempt that was made with the genset in the early 2000s, no other manufacturer has tried to bring them back either. The GP38s and GP40s are simply just too well built to be replaced, hence why we're seeing Amtrak's 20-year-old GP15Ds being replaced with rebuilt GP38s from the 70s. This is no different elsewhere either, with almost every Class 1 railroad opting to rebuild its 4-axles over and over again. Only time will tell how much longer the GP38 and GP40 platforms will survive on North American railroads, but seeing that Amtrak has opted to replace its 50-year-old work engines with slightly different 50-year-old work engines, I'd say that they'll continue to serve Amtrak for many years to come. So, next time you're on Amtrak, keep an eye out for these underappreciated work engines, and catch the old switchers while you can.